probably seen ads on television hailing natural gas as the clean-burning transition fuel.
American shale basins contain an ocean of natural gas.
The method of gas drilling they use is called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It blasts a mix of water and chemicals 8,000 feet into the ground. The fracking itself is like a mini earthquake. The intense pressure breaks apart the rock and frees up the gas. In order to frack, you need some fracking fluid, a mix of over 596 chemicals, from the unpronounceable to the unknown to the too well-known. The brew is full of corrosion inhibitors, gelants, drilling additives, biocides, shale control inhibitors, liquid breaker aids, viscosifiers, liquid gel concentrates.
Why is hydrofracking raising such concerns? The materials used for hydrofracking don't biodegrade. Once they're in the environment, they're in the environment to stay. If just 2% of these hundreds of thousands of wells go south in some way or another, that's thousands upon thousands of incidents, and I invite questions about that.
What Mr. Appleton is doing is searching for a problem that does not exist, because of looking at all these other examples in all these states, there has not been a problem with hydraulic fracturing.
In less than a decade, the area became rapidly industrialized, with over 5,000 wells drilled. So going to Garfield County is like looking into the future of any area slated for drilling. It's also the subject of the first preliminary study on the health effects of gas drilling. 7 medical researchers from the University of Colorado studied the air and the water, finding acute problems from toxic emissions from gas development. So when I got calls from people in Garfield County, there were calls from people who had severe health problems.
This is Karen Truelove. She started getting massive headaches, getting really ill, feeling sick, and she said it got so bad that she didn't even plan her days anymore. She just tried to get through them. Then my friend Rick is benzene in his blood, toluene.
Tara was speaking for her friends that couldn't speak for themselves mostly because of non-disclosure agreements. People who were in lawsuits or who had settlements that stipulated that once they received their money, they could no longer go public with their stories. I kept getting in car after car, hearing symptom after symptom. My first day in Garfield County, I did 16 hours worth of interviews, and finally, I got a chance to sit down with Theo Colborn, winner of 5 Rachel Carson Awards, a Time Magazine Environmentalist of the Year, a Congressional Fellow. Her accolades are too numerous to count.
We've begun to look at what's being used to drill a well, data that the government should be collecting but isn't collecting. We've been able to get our hands on some of that.
Because of the exemptions, fracking chemicals are considered proprietary, like the special sauce for a Big Mac or the secret formula for Coca-Cola. The only reason we know anything about the fracking chemicals is because of the work of Theo Colborn. By chasing down trucks, combing through material safety data sheets, and collecting samples, Theo has identified 596 different chemicals in 900 chemical products.
Every environmental law we wrote to protect public health is ignored. But the neurological effects are very insidious.
3 years ago, I started getting really dizzy.
At first, you may just have headaches. Then the next thing you might have ringing in your ears.
I thought I had an inner ear infection. I went to my doctor, and she's kind of, your ears are clean.
Or you may be a little disoriented, or you may feel a little dizzy.
So they sent me down for a CAT scan.
But eventually, you may feel what is called peripheral neuropathy. And when you get to this stage, you have irreversible brain damage.
For the last 4 years, I have these lesions in my brain. Don't know where they came from.
You may begin to get swelling.
I hurt everywhere in my body. My legs, my feet, everywhere.
Your extremities, especially the arms and the legs.
I couldn't move. I couldn't reach my face to eat.
And never know where the pain is going to be. The pain can be excruciating.
You get pains all over your body. You don't know why you're getting the pains, and then they come and go, and they'll show up in another part of your body.
I go out and I talk to the bosses, the men who are overlooking what's going on, and even their supervisors. They are so surprised. They look at me as if I'm crazy when I ask them, well, where are they mixing in the chemicals now? Oh, we're not using any chemicals. Well, if we are, they're safe. Even the boss bosses don't know what they're telling those men to handle. And once the public hears the story, and they'll say, well, why aren't we out there monitoring? We can't monitor until we know what they're using. There's no way to monitor. You can't.
Studies and surveys by GWPC, EPA, and IOGC over the last 11 years have found no real credible threat to underground drinking water from hydraulic fracturing. Studies and surveys by GWPC, EPA, and IOGC over the last 11 years have found no real credible threat to underground drinking water from hydraulic fracturing.
Let's clear this up. I'm not here under the authority of EPA speaking on behalf of views that agency represents.
I will put Weston Wilson not speaking on behalf of the EPA, although he works for the EPA. In 2004, the EPA was investigating water contamination incidents due to hydraulic fracturing across the country. But a panel rejected the inquiry, stating that although hazardous materials were being injected underground, EPA did not need to investigate. Weston Wilson, a 20-year veteran of the EPA, wrote a letter to Congress objecting. He also noted that on the peer review panel that authored the report, 5 of 7 members appeared to have conflicts of interest and would benefit from the EPA's decision not to conduct a further investigation.
They came out with the patently ridiculous conclusion. They had showed it was toxic and then said it wasn't a risk. It made no sense, and only in an Orwellian world would you accept that.
From 1995 until 2000, when he became vice president, Dick Cheney was the CEO of Halliburton. One of the first things he did when he became vice president was to form what was known as the Energy Task Force. They met up to 40 times with industry leaders. They only met once with members from environmental groups. The Energy Task Force and a $100 million lobbying effort on behalf of the industry were significant in the passage of what's called the Halliburton loophole to the Safe Drinking Water Act, which authorizes oil and gas drillers exclusively to inject known hazardous materials adjacent to underground drinking water supplies. It passed as a part of the Bush administration's Energy Policy Act of 2005. So all science at that point stopped?
All science, all data, everything stopped. We were appalled about burying this kind of, maybe no pun intended, but burying this secret that it was known to be toxic. You know, when the president says to its bureaucracy, don't investigate, expedite things for industry, we do those jobs well too. One could characterize this entire industry as having 100 years of history of purchasing those they contaminate. So they purchase the land, and often with an agreement of secrecy of somebody that's alleging they've been contaminated by oil and gas production. So the industry itself has that type of practice.
The corporate business model is to come into an area, develop it as fast as you can, and if you trash anything, you make the people who you impact prove it, argue it in a court of law, and the last person standing gets bought off and you move on.
You're saying it's the industry itself should be proving it and not the people.
This is America. We shouldn't be assuming that corporations can keep a secret, especially when they're practicing in our backyard. So the onus should be on the industry to prove to the government that their practice is benign and not that assumption. What you could be picking up from these citizens is what we should be investigating, but we're not. And don't assume because Obama got elected that something's changed at the EPA yet in that regard. We're still asleep at the wheel. Even if they weren't true, they deserve an investigation. They're citizens of the United States. And they certainly don't deserve to be exposed to secret chemicals. It's un-American.
Each time they drill a well, they need between 1 and 7 million gallons of water. Each time they go back and frack an existing well, they need an additional 1 to 7 million gallons of water. they can frack a well up to 18 times in its life. They started out west, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and in the south, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama. 450,000 wells times 18 times 1 to 7 million gallons is something like 40 trillion gallons of water, all of it infused with the 596 chemicals in the fracking fluid.
Studies and surveys by GWPC, EPA, and IOGCC over the last 11 years have found no real credible threat to underground drinking water from hydraulic fracturing.
Sometimes it bubbles and hisses when it comes out. So I highly recommend that you do.
Drink it?
I won't drink it.
Fracking is coming to Monterey County. The Planning Commission voted a 2-year moratorium to study the effects of fracking on our water supply and the pollution aspects. I'm asking that you contact your Monterey County supervisors because the Planning Commission ruling is now before them, and they need to get educated by the public that we can't afford 1 million gallons of water a day on fracking when the farmers don't even have enough water to water their fields. And also the poisonous aspects that you have seen in this short clip of Gasland, that is another reason, a huge reason. So I'm hoping that you will contact them and get active, because if you aren't active, then these are the consequences. We can't just keep using our resources and being mindless about it and hoping that someone up there in government is going to fix it for us. We are the problem and we are the solution, and unless we let our supervisors know we care, then why should they? So thank you for watching. Our next segment's going to be on the reporting of New York Times. Can we rely on the New York Times, a corporate, in my opinion, a corporate media newspaper, to tell reliable stories? And they've just become absolutely outlandish when it comes to reporting on the terrible state of our wild horses. So I'm Annie Griffin, your host. Thanks for listening. This is an article by the New York Times. Dave Phillips supposedly has won awards for his reporting. As wild horses overrun the West, ranchers fear land will be gobbled up. This has been the most dismal example of corporate media corruption news article I think I've ever seen. And we cannot trust the New York Times anymore. I mean, that was the last holdout, I thought, that where we could get some good articles. And in it, basically, you can look it online, Google New York Times, and it's 2014, October 1st. And I'm going to scroll down here so you can read it with me. And here we're going to go here. And basically it's saying that there's just way too many horses. And it's just not true. What really disturbs me in this article is originally in 1971, 53 million acres was allocated for wild horses to roam, and they were given devoted principal presence under the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act. And the BLM has removed, without congressional approval, already 22 million acres, while they're saying the horses are overpopulated. And under devoted principal presence, that means that the horses get first choice of land and water and resources, and everything else comes second. Well, I have gone personally to the BLM office, and with Craig Downer, who wrote The Wild Horse Conspiracy, gone there and have obtained the records that prove that the cattle and livestock are getting more annual feed allocations on these herd management areas that are meant for horses than the horses themselves. And they're fencing off a lot of these wild herd areas that were delegated to the wild horse and the burro, and they're running them off. And they've already ran off and are in holding and have disappeared. 46,000 horses, wild horses, have just basically disappeared. And when you go to the BLM and ask where they are and that you want to go see them, they say, well, they're on private ranches. And yet, the article that was written by in ProPublica by the same author is last year reporting that all the missing horses, what happened to the wild horses Tom Davis bought from the government. Well, apparently Tom Davis bought our wild horses that cost $1,000 a piece to round up, okay, sold to him by the truckload at $10 a head, and they disappeared. And BLM doesn't want to ask Tom Davis where they are because they trust Tom Davis. Yet if you and I adopt any more, even one horse, the BLM will come on our property and want to check up on the horse, which is a good thing, but not Tom Davis. Tom Davis happens to be living right next to Ken Salazar, former Secretary of Interior, and was a friend of his. And of course, Ken Salazar was a real advocate of running off these wild horses. And why are they doing it? They want the land. They want it for gas, for oil, and they want it for the livestock. And so your beef habit is causing all this terrible removal of our not only wild horses, but all the wildlife that goes with it. So if you can reduce your beef habit, even by one, by making a statement that you're only going to buy beef from private ranchers that graze their beef on their own ranches and not on public land, that would make a huge difference. And you can go to Whole Foods and these different health food outlets and ask them, are you providing beef for, that is raised on private ranches? And if you do that soon enough, they will make sure that that's something that they can provide for you. So you can also go to ProPublica and read that article that was written last year, and by the same man who is now saying that there's too many wild horses and they need to be removed. So it's doublespeak, folks, all the way around. And it's just horrendous, the corruption. You just can't get any truth out there anymore at all. Our next topic is going to be on Ebola.
study released by the CDC on September 26th. That's 4 days before we learned of patient 0 in Dallas. That new study posits that the number of cases in Liberia and Sierra Leone are growing at a much faster rate than previously thought. And of course, it is not under control. It is ever expanding.
Today, we are providing the information that an individual traveling from Liberia has been diagnosed with Ebola in the United States.
Hey, Dr. Colbert here, and there's a lot of fear concerning the Ebola virus, so I'd like to give you some facts so it can relieve your fears. First of all, approximately 21,000 people are presently infected with the Ebola virus, and the CDC predicts that by January of 2015, 1.4 million people will be infected. Now, that's a huge jump in just 3 months. In fact, that's the entire population of the state of New Hampshire.
Now, the latest on the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which is moving faster than efforts to contain it. The disease has struck hard in 3 countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, which is the epicenter. A Liberian government official who had flown to Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, died of the disease in a hospital there. 2 American aid workers infected in Liberia, 33-year-old Kent Brantley and 59-year-old Nancy Wrightball, will be sent home for care at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. It is the first time any Ebola patient has been sent back to the U.S. for treatment.
Outside the John F. Kennedy Hospital in Monrovia, Liberia, 20-year-old Ibaga Stiwo is sick.
In Dallas, there is no sign Ebola is spreading, but the fear of Ebola definitely is.
Stay with CBS 11 for continuing coverage of Ebola.
The first case of Ebola in America dominates on TV, on radio,
government and health officials in Dallas are trying to reassure the public that...
and online, like this post on Twitter. Everyone in Dallas better get to their nearest hospital and quick. I don't care if you feel fine. I want this thing contained. News that several children had been in contact with the Ebola victim and then attended area schools has frightened many parents.
We're questioning right now as we're walking to school whether I'm going to let him go, and I'm heading towards not letting him go to school today.
She's not alone. Attendance at the affected schools is down.
For those 5 schools, it's 86% attendance. It's usually around 95, 96%.
You might expect Ebola fear, concern of an Ebola outbreak, would have people flooding emergency rooms and clinics. Health officials say that hasn't happened so far. Do you worry it could spread?
Yes, I'm worried about the spread. Because kids go to schools, everybody go to church, everybody go to market.
Not everybody's Ebola fear is the same. For instance, in this community, closest to the patient now being treated, it's mostly immigrants. Their fears are, what if there's a stigma attached to the disease? What if they were banished? What if they were quarantined? How would they go to work? How would they pay their bills? How would they survive? That really scares them. To try and calm public concerns and provide answers, Dallas activated its Emergency Operations Center, normally reserved for disasters. But it got off to a rough start with frustrated reporters.
Wouldn't you want to keep them all in one place? Keep them in the apartment.
Fear has even come to the fair, as in the State Fair of Texas, triggering concern it could hurt attendance. Extra hand sanitizer has been put out for visitors. Even iconic Big Tex has added a line to his usual Texas howdy.
Always wash your hands before eating.
The Liberian Daily Observer, which is the largest newspaper in Liberia, just published an article on their front page with the headline, Ebola AIDS manufactured by Western Pharmaceuticals, US DOD. The article basically accuses the U.S. of manufacturing this Ebola outbreak in what they call an American military medical industry scheme to use Africa as a testing ground for bioweapons. The article was written by Dr. Cyril Broderick, a professor who's taught at different colleges, including the Agricultural College of the University of Delaware. In the article, he urges African leaders to not let their people be Western guinea pigs. He accuses the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Tulane University, the U.S. Army, and others as all being connected to this bioweapons testing plot.
And now to the latest on the first case of Ebola diagnosed in the United States. New today, we know the patient's name now. He's Thomas Eric Duncan. He remains in serious condition this afternoon at the hospital in Dallas.
We also learned today that Duncan came into contact with as many as 18 people between the time he left Liberia on September 19th, including 5 Dallas students from 4 different schools. He arrived in Dallas via DFW on September the 20th, and we've just learned United Airlines now believes Duncan flew to DFW from Washington Dulles Airport on flight 822. Governor Rick Perry held a news conference this afternoon in Dallas. He says those students are being monitored at home, but the governor also says so far none of them have shown any symptoms.
These children have been identified and they are being monitored, and the disease cannot be transmitted before having any symptoms.
The CDC is also monitoring Duncan's family members and the ambulance crew who transported him to the hospital. How Duncan's case has been handled is raising some questions about Texas Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas and what they knew. The doctor from the hospital says Duncan walked into the ER on September 26th. A nurse asked him if he had been out of the country, but that information apparently was not relayed to other medical personnel. Duncan did have a blood test, but not an Ebola screening, and was sent home with antibiotics. 2 days later, he was rushed to the ER with a high fever and nausea. Yesterday, doctors confirmed that Duncan tested positive for Ebola, and he is now in an isolation unit.
The fear of Ebola in affected countries and beyond is palpable. A man in Guinea suspected of having the gruesome disease was left lying in a city street for hours. Passers-by too scared to help, medical resources stretched thin.
Let them come and take him from here, because we are afraid.
More than 930 people have died in the outbreak. The military now helping combat the spread of Ebola in Sierra Leone. Liberian soldiers are clamping down on travelers. No one with a fever allowed in or out of the country. And in Spain, health officials reassuring the public there is little risk of Ebola spreading from an infected priest evacuated from Liberia, now in isolation at a Madrid hospital.
He is stable with fever, and the most important thing is that Father Miguel is not hemorrhaging. This is a sign of a positive prognosis.
The World Health Organization will soon decide if the Ebola outbreak is an international public health emergency, which could initiate a more global response. The CDC is operating on its highest alert level, the first time since the 2009 swine flu pandemic. The agency's director briefed representatives on Capitol Hill.
We, with our partners, have been able to stop every Ebola outbreak to date, and I'm confident that if we do what works, we will stop this one also. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy.
Dr. Thomas Frieden says tried and true infection control methods, diagnosis, isolation, and tracing patient contacts are the best way to end the outbreak. Cindy Sharp, Associated Press.
As the medical world continues to grapple with Ebola, there are growing calls for experimental medicines to be used more widely. 2 American aid workers infected with the virus appear to be improving after receiving an unapproved medicine, ZMapp, ahead of their evacuation back to the United States.
This is an emergency compassionate use situation. This is not a well-controlled laboratory study. A lot of work remains to be done to see how it works and why and how quickly. The apparent speed of recovery was faster than I would have expected, so there may be a lot of things that we still don't understand about the virus.
The antibodies were originally harvested from mice that had been injected with parts of the virus. Experiments on monkeys suggest the antibody cocktail may reduce fatalities when given after exposure to the virus. The proteins are then grown in specially modified leaves of tobacco, which act like a photocopier, reproducing larger amounts.
I do agree there's no vaccine. Treatment is experimental. The real way of stopping it is by transmission of the virus, which we know quite well how to do. It's just spreading that message and then providing basic supportive care to people who are being treated at the moment. What we must remember, it's a very isolating, stigmatizing disease, and people deserve to be treated with care and concern, which is what we're all committed to.
The Spanish government is sending a specially equipped plane to Liberia to evacuate a priest who is infected with the virus in the capital city, Monrovia. The World Health Organization will announce on Friday how it plans to slow down or halt the global spread of a virus that has claimed 900 lives in West Africa since February.
Some of it, again, is up on Infowars.com. The most complete coverage on Ebola is at DrudgeReport.com. And also PrisonPlanet.com is covering quite a bit of it. We're covering on the nightly news as well. CDC refuses to identify where previous Ebola tests originated. Tuesday evening, the CDC confirmed what we reported on in the morning, the Breitbart News, that individuals in the United States have been tested for Ebola. Those tests came back negative. You can't believe any of that. But the CDC would not identify the states where they originated. CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta reported Tuesday, that's what we reported on the Drudge picked up, that half a dozen people have been tested for Ebola. It's way more than that. And it's now being covered up. CDC gets dozens of calls about people who are ill after traveling in Africa. Economic Collapse blog reports, should we be alarmed that the CDC has received several dozen calls from hospitals around the country about people who are ill after traveling in Africa? As you read above and below, a lot more Ebola testing has been going on around the nation. We've been hearing about in the mainstream media. And then it goes on to break down that people are collapsing from Liberia, and coming to Morocco, and coming to London. I mean, just a lot of scary stuff going on. And again, I'm more concerned about government response and using this as a power grab than I even am about the Ebola. But this is undoubtedly a real pandemic in Africa, now in 5 nations at least. They've brought Ebola, at least 2 people into Atlanta. It's a serious situation. But again, CNN reported yesterday, U.S. health authorities concerned, and they've been concealing the number of suspected Ebola victims from the public. Ebola tested across the nation, government suppressing the info. Ebola, BBC reports, global experts begin emergency talks at the World Health Organization. Global health experts at the World Health Organization are meeting to discuss new measures to tackle the Ebola outbreak. The meeting is expected to last 2 days and will decide whether to declare a global health emergency. Today, a man suspected of contracting Ebola died in Saudi Arabia. If confirmed, this will be the first Ebola-related death outside of Africa. The outbreak began in February in Guyana and has since spread to Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and now to Saudi Arabia. On Wednesday, a nurse became the second person to die from Ebola in Nigeria. Nigeria's health minister and 5 other cases of Ebola have been treated in isolation. Sub-Saharan Africa's largest city. It comes as leading infectious disease experts have called for experimental treatments to be offered more widely. Let's continue. Ebola outbreak could be much worse than first thought. Johannesburg, South Africa. The worst outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus in history could actually be much worse than official death tolls reflect, the World Health Organization says. And again, they have a history of covering up how bad things really are when they're serious. Then when something isn't serious, like H1N1 5 years ago, they hype it up like it's the end of the world. When we have governments as evil as this running things, that's the big concern. And why is the southern border still wide open? And why have Border Patrol agents, senior ones, gone public saying they've been ordered to load people up, vomiting, with high fevers, you name it, from the Middle East, from Africa, and just let them come in on the buses, which is then increasing the surge of illegals coming in. Here's another one out of Reuters. Bodies dumped in streets as West Africa struggles to curb Ebola. Relatives of Ebola victims in Liberia defy government orders and dumped infected bodies in the streets as West African governments struggle to enforce tough measures to curb an outbreak of the virus that has killed, they've been saying this for over a week, 887 people. It's way over that, folks. Most estimates have been over 1,000 for a week. Sierra Leone deploys troops in Ebola crisis to control the border and other issues. We won't do that here, don't worry. Ebola virus spreads because of lax quarantine enforcement, says the World Health Organization in the New York Times. 5 new Ebola cases and another death confirmed in Nigeria. Now they're saying in Africa, God is angry with Liberia for trying to legalize homosexuality, blaming Ebola on homosexualism. Well, I'd blame it on airborne viruses that come from fruit bats that have been manipulated in bioweapons labs in the last 50 years, 45 years. That's on record. It's clearly been weaponized and it's becoming more airborne. And by the way, if you're a new listener and say, hey, it's not airborne, mainline science has said for 2 years, evidence it's airborne, with monkeys transferring it to pigs in Africa in cages separated, in laboratories where they're separated. I think a lot of this testing and CDC stuff and UN stuff, undoubtedly these labs are becoming vectors for it, even if they're not trying to create it. It's no doubt SV40 that gave over 100 million Americans cancer on record was from the vaccine production. The question is, was it on purpose or by accident? Well, one of the developers of it told PBS television, we played the clip probably 100 times here, we ought to pull it back up. He was interviewed by the Boston station, the PBS, aired nationally back in the early 90s, that, oh yeah, we knew it was in there, but there's too many people. Ha ha ha. I mean, this is the type of garbage we're dealing with. What's shocking is how Ebola patients look before they die. A British doctor working in Sierra Leone describes the horror of the deadly disease. Giant purple blisters everywhere. Blood pouring out of every orifice. I'm not even going to read any more of this here on air. Maybe I'll get to it more so people know how serious this is.
Ebola, Ebola, don't touch a friend. Do you guys ever worry about Ebola? Do you think that's real?
No. The government said nobody should eat bushmeat. If Ebola was here, a lot of people would be there. Ebola, no Ebola in Liberia.
Since February 2014, an outbreak of Ebola spread across West Africa, from Guinea to Sierra Leone, and now it's finally reaching the coast of Liberia and its capital, Monrovia. Confirmed by health officials, the deadly virus has already killed 7 people in Monrovia. Scientists speculate that a possible cause of the Ebola outbreak might stem from the prevalent consumption of bushmeat from animals like monkeys and fruit bats. The scientific concerns surrounding the consumption of bushmeat begin in our genes. Because we share 99% of our DNA with monkeys, the chances of an infectious and incurable disease like Ebola crossing over from a monkey to a human is exponentially higher than with any other animal.
Ebola is one of those words that you can say it anywhere in the world, and it invokes fear.
Dr. Joseph Fair is a renowned virologist who we met working out of a lab near Liberia's capital city of Monrovia. Take me through sort of the life cycle of the Ebola virus if someone catches it, if a person catches it.
So Ebola is what we know as a viral hemorrhagic syndrome, and so a syndrome is just like AIDS. Ebola is an aggressive hemorrhagic fever syndrome. Ebola in particular causes the walls of the capillaries to slightly separate and blood starts leaking. You'll get conjunctival injection, which is bleeding into the eye. That petechial hemorrhage and that leakage ultimately leads to shock and death, just like you would have with sepsis.
So you're bleeding out from the inside?
Basically, you're bleeding out from the inside. Your blood pressure is lowering to an amount, so when your capillaries are leaking, the blood is no longer being transferred through your body effectively. It is a very painful and agonizing death that no one would want to go through.
Despite the fact that I was now worried about bleeding from my eyes, we headed to a local lab where they were quarantining and testing for Ebola. The lab is an abandoned 8 testing facility. Nobody was there save a few scientists with hazmat suits working on the outbreak. Behind those doors was Ebola culture, which was being used to compare to cases of reported Ebola throughout the country to see if it matched up.
Can I touch this? Is it safe? Don't touch it. Don't touch it. No, don't touch it.
Jesus. How about these masks? They wear these masks? So right in here is where the Ebola testing is actually happening. These are the suits that they wear in here. And I'll respect what he says when he says not to touch them because these have already been used. Somehow I feel like this sheet is not protecting me from Ebola.
There is a set of personal protective equipment that we wear.
When you go inside,
we wear this. We wear this.
Okay. Are you scared when you go inside?
Scared?
Yes.
Scared of
no? Scared of Ebola.
That's true, but
I'm standing out here and I'm scared. I'm glad my job's out here and your job's in there.
I can dress you and you go in there.
No, thank you. It's okay. Dr. Sarr's in charge of all infectious disease testing in Liberia. He's kind of a first line of defense against mysterious disease coming out of Africa. But like many Liberians, Dr. Sarr was skeptical about the presence of Ebola.
The truth is that we haven't had any except for one case. Of course, one case constitutes an outbreak in the Ivory Coast, somewhere in the 70s, I think. And that is all. So since then in Liberia, no, not anywhere else except now.
Culturally, humans have evolved with non-human primates all throughout Africa and Asia. And I think something that we don't usually think of in the West is how that they evolved here. They're kept as pets. They're also used as a major food source, aka bushmeat. Now, a monkey is only one part of what you would consider bushmeat. A piece of bushmeat would be any animal coming from the forest. Again, most people don't kind of recognize the need for bushmeat. So when you imagine living in the deep forest of Central Africa and or Asia, it's very difficult to raise domestic animals, yet human beings by their nature need protein sources. So bushmeat in many parts of the world still is a necessary part of the diet. There are certain types of bushmeat which we know are more dangerous than others. And those particularly are birds, non-human primates, including the chimpanzees, gorillas, monkeys, bats, we're learning, are of great concern.
But despite the danger, how does one of Liberia's top scientists feel about bushmeat?
Yeah. I will be very dishonest if I tell you no, I eat bushmeat. The antelopes, they kill them, they dry them, and the meat comes to market. That's what I like most, yeah. But I don't like monkey meat.
It turns out the very facility we were standing at has a rich history of pandemic disease. A chimpanzee testing facility in the 80s and 90s, it was here that a doctor named Preston Marks discovered HIV-2 in a local pet monkey in a nearby village. While HIV-1, the most common strain of the disease, was discovered to have come from chimpanzees as early as 1959, it was unclear where HIV-2, the less common but still deadly HIV, originated from, until Dr. Marks tested a sooty mangabey while working at the Institute in Liberia in the late 80s.
And I took this picture on my second trip of this young girl in Lofa County, as those are Liberia, and it's worth 1,000 words. I mean, look at it. I mean, that sooty mangabey, which is the species, the only species in West Africa that harbors the ancestor to HIV-2. And look at it. It's like it's just like a cat. It's like a house cat. It's our friend.
In an eerie parallel to Dr. Marks discovering HIV-2 in a pet monkey from Lofa, today's Ebola outbreak seems to have also originated from the same place. Lofa, a dense jungle province of Liberia that sits on the border of Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, is a trading center where hunters from the jungle bring bushmeat to trucks that then head into markets in all three neighboring countries. In an attempt to stop the virus, the governments have banned the bushmeat trade. But Liberians have been ignoring the threat and the ban. In order to find out why, we met up with a local journalist. But turns out he harbored a few Ebola conspiracy theories himself.
Here's your friend. I'm interested in this Ebola thing because the feeling in Monrovia and across the whole country is that Ebola never came to Liberia. We are at Waterside, this is the main market, and we are going to the market where they sell bush meat and other food stuff.
Apparently the bush meat shop is in the back. Holy shit, the smell is super putrid. So the Liberian government bans bushmeat, totally, right? But you can still buy bushmeat.
You can still buy bushmeat because they are telling the Liberians not to eat it. And they're telling the marketers not to sell it. But people are still selling it because they believe the government is pulling their legs.
All right, so why is the government of Liberia saying there's Ebola if there isn't Ebola?
Apparently, it's a scam to get some money from the international communities, from the donors. It's mainly so because the government is broke. Everybody knows that. The government was able to say that there was $16 billion investment here. They have nothing to show for it. So a lot of people don't believe that Ebola is here.
Official government policy was to ban the sale of bushmeat. However, as we hit the market, we learned how effective that prohibition actually was.
Excuse me, madam. We want to buy some meat.
Hey, Nagby, what kind of meat is this?
These are deer meat. Has the meat caused you any problem? So, what do you believe about Ebola?
Our great-grand were born.
Do not believe that Ebola is
no Ebola in meat. My children and myself were eating it. My husband eating it. My family, everybody eating meat.
I don't know everything that's going on right now. There's a guy singing through a megaphone. She's screaming at me that there's no Ebola in meat. There's hundreds of dead deer parts.
It's the same God yesterday, it's the same God today, and the same God forever. Somebody put your hands together, so thank you, Jesus.
Monkeys are both a delicacy and pets. In fact, they're so prevalent, it's hard to make the connection that these cute monkeys could harbor a super virus or create a pandemic.
I'm Emmanuel Nagwe. I'm a journalist.
We just saw this guy randomly on the side of the street. He's got a pet monkey that he got last night from Ivory Coast. His friend wanted to eat it, but he said, no, I'm keeping it as a pet.
This is pet.
Yeah. Nobody will eat it. If you want to carry my monkey, now for test, carry me and my monkey, go and test for my monkey. I no sickness. I got no sickness. Ebola, you carry Ebola to America, you carry Ebola to anywhere. Anywhere the government say Ebola is, let's go there for Ebola, but Ebola is not here with me. I got Ebola here. Me, I Edmund with it. If I die, that's my right.
Nagby went to go get more bushmeat, while I looked into where I could go buy some monkey meat. Hi, how are you? Can I buy some monkey, please? Thank you. We came out to the back here, and this woman had 4 or 5 monkeys for sale. So while the Liberian government theoretically has banned monkey meat, you can still get it. Look at this, just a wheelbarrow full of bushmeat right here.
You put in the water, it soak.
Okay.
When it soak, then the flesh can come out.
Do you worry about eating this?
No. Sweet. It's sweet? Yeah. Very sweet.
You like it?
Sweet meat. Right now, I eat like this. I'm very hungry. I didn't eat like this. Thank you,
Can we not splatter the monkey all over me, please? Oh my God, I'm getting fucking pegged with Ebola monkey right now. I'm getting fragged with Ebola monkey.
Oh, did everyone eat it?
Do you guys ever worry about Ebola? Do you think that's real?
No. I don't believe that Ebola is real. Since we got knowing ourselves, we've been eating this. We've been eating this thing at no harm. Not no harm.
All right. Look, you cut yourself. You cut your hand. You cut your hand. Look.
You got no problem. No problem.
It's okay? Nagby showed us what he had bought for that night's dinner.
Okay, what I got was some fresh meat. This is deer meat.
Oh, more deer meat.
Yeah, you see the from the feet. And this is bush rodent. We call it bush rat. These stuff are delicacy, my man. If you give somebody cow meat, they'll prefer this. If you give them fish, they'll prefer this. Seriously.
Is that a claw?
It's a claw, yeah.
Nagby invited us to his home to watch how his wife prepares the bushmeat for a meal.
This is the house. Here's my wife, Fatou. And she's coming to prepare the food.
What happened? Oh, are you okay?
Yeah. What happened with your finger? It was sharpened, so I made a mistake.
You cut yourself?
Yeah.
By accident. Are you okay?
Yeah.
You cut while were you cutting the meat?
Yeah.
Just like any other food, if it's cooked, there's not really a problem. It's through the preparation where you get that blood and body fluid transfer from the rodent to the humans. And we actually have found humans with the monkey forms of the viruses. And so those are people that we obviously monitor because those viruses might be the next HIV pandemic.
I want to tie in the Ebola crisis with the whole scandal of rounding up our wild horses for $89 million a year with our tax dollars, saying that they're overpopulating the West and they need to be removed. And at the same time, 600 meat inspectors will be laid off this year that should be inspecting our meat and protecting our food supply from terrorism. And who's responsible for this? It's your representatives. So it's really important to contact your representatives in Congress. Sam Farr sits on the Appropriations Committee that is giving money towards these wild horse roundups. And Sam Farr, our congressman here in Monterey County, he's against that. He doesn't want to use that money for that, but he's a lone cry in the wilderness, and he doesn't bark very loudly. But anyway, so what is happening and what can happen is a ISIS warrior could go to Liberia and contact Ebola because he's a kamikaze and he's a suicide bomber, so to speak, and then come to the United States and infect God knows how many people before anyone even realizes who he is. And there you have it. The pandemic has started because President Obama does not believe that we should quarantine anyone for 21 days that's coming from those countries. So this is just a huge massacre of the American people, of people all over the world. But I guess America should get infected so that the people here start getting active and demanding that instead of wasting our tax dollars on wild horse roundups, and remember, according to Indian prophecy, the wild horses are the messengers to the American people. And that's why I correlate the wild horses with this. It's the spending money on rounding up wild horses and burros that should be saving that, you know, that $89 million could be going into food inspection and protecting our food from terrorist activity. Oh no. Instead, they're going to continue this. And they need to return those horses, the ones that are left, back to the lands that the BLM has taken away, 22 million acres, and leave the horses and burros alone and put that money into meat inspections. So we're now going to go towards to a site, Stan Painter. He is the CEO of the National Joint Council of Meat Inspectors. And what his report is saying, that diseased mad cow animals are being processed into the food chain. And unless you speak out, folks, it's going to continue. We had 1.5 million pounds of meat recall just in one plant alone. People are dying of E. coli, listeria, tuberculosis, Jonas disease, which is Crohn's disease in humans. It's all happening because we are not doing spiritually, mentally, and physically what we're supposed to do, which is get away from the bad karma of killing our animals for food. We do not need and we should not be eating our animals for food. So thank you for watching, and now we're going to go to Stan Painter's site. So this is EchoWatch, and this is a site that there's a report here, and I'm going to read it. It says the U.S. Department of Agriculture is under fire over its shortage of meat and poultry inspectors after the federal agency failed to properly inspect more than 4,000 tons of tainted beef that was shipped throughout the country in 2013. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. Reports the New York Times. Now, earlier I was reporting that the New York Times is not reporting a lot of things, so you can't trust them. But in this case, this is from Stan Painter, who isn't a meat inspector. He is a meat inspector, so he knows what's going on. I hope you'll go to his site, and I hope you'll contact your representatives. We're coming to the end of the... And let them know that you want safe meat inspection. You want humane slaughter. And that you are going to boycott meat until you know it's safe and that they are being humanely slaughtered. What is wrong with this picture that $89 million is going towards rounding up wild horses and burros that do not need to be rounded up, while 600 meat inspectors will be laid off this year? Something is wrong here, and you need to contact your representatives and let them know that you want safe food and food inspection to be #1 priority. And that $89 million a year should be going towards sending the horses back and the burros back where they belong, to their rightful lands, and getting on with safe food inspection. So I'm Annie Griffin, your host. I want to thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope that you will get active, because there's karma for not acting. There's karma for not doing anything.